Imagine meeting yourself 10 years from now. Not an older version of your body, not a photograph altered by artificial intelligence, but the actual person who will inherit every decision you make today. The person who will wake up inside the life you are quietly building right now. The apartment you choose, the friendships you keep, the habits you repeat, the money you save or spend, the conversations you avoid, the risks you never take. Every tiny decision slowly becomes part of their world. Now imagine they ask you a simple question. Why did you leave all of this for me? Why did you leave me the debt? Why did you leave me the unhealthy body? Why did you leave me the unfinished dreams? Why did you leave me the anxiety you knew was growing? Most of us would feel uncomfortable hearing those questions. Yet something even stranger is happening. Your brain often treats that future version of you almost like a completely different person. And according to modern psychology, this is not simply a poetic metaphor. It may be remarkably close to how the brain actually works. This invisible illusion quietly shapes thousands of decisions every year. It influences how much we save, how much we procrastinate, whether we exercise, whether we sleep, whether we finish difficult projects, whether we choose temporary comfort over long-term fulfillment. It even influences how likely we are to protect our health decades before illness ever appears. Perhaps this explains one of the oldest mysteries of human behavior. Why do intelligent people knowingly make decisions that hurt themselves later? Why do people stay awake long after they promised themselves they would sleep earlier? Why do they spend money they intended to save? Why do they postpone the phone call, the workout, the difficult conversation, the first chapter of the book they desperately want to write? Most people answer these questions with a familiar explanation: laziness, poor discipline, weak willpower. But neuroscience is beginning to tell a far more fascinating story. Perhaps the problem is not that you don't care about your future. Perhaps your brain simply struggles to recognize that future person as you. For hundreds of thousands of years, the human brain evolved to solve immediate problems. A rustle in the bushes, an approaching predator, an opportunity to find food before sunset, a social conflict that might threaten acceptance within the tribe. Survival rewarded attention to what was happening now, not 30 years from now. Our ancestors rarely benefited from planning retirement. They benefited from surviving the afternoon. Evolution therefore built a brain exquisitely sensitive to immediate rewards and immediate dangers. The present became vivid. The future remained strangely abstract. Thousands of years later, civilization changed far faster than biology. Today, many of the greatest threats to our well-being are no longer immediate. Heart disease develops gradually. Financial security accumulates slowly. Relationships strengthen over years. Skills emerge after thousands of hours. Most meaningful outcomes are delayed. Yet the ancient brain still whispers the same message it always has. Take the reward now. Tomorrow can wait. Psychologists call one version of this tendency temporal discounting. It describes the curious way humans value immediate rewards far more than larger future rewards. Imagine someone offers you a choice: $100 today, or $120 a month from now. Objectively, waiting seems wiser. Yet many people instinctively choose the immediate reward, not because they cannot calculate, because the future feels psychologically distant. The present feels emotionally real. This difference appears everywhere. 5 more minutes in bed feels real. Better health next year feels imaginary. Buying something today feels satisfying. Financial freedom decades later feels almost fictional. Scrolling for another hour produces immediate dopamine. Learning a difficult new skill promises benefits that remain invisible for months. The brain naturally favors what it can feel. This is where dopamine is often misunderstood. People commonly describe dopamine as the brain's pleasure chemical. In reality, dopamine is more accurately involved in motivation, anticipation, and learning. It encourages us to pursue rewards that appear available now. Every notification, every sugary snack, every online purchase, every entertaining video. Each one offers something the brain evolved to appreciate: immediate certainty. Meanwhile, long-term rewards ask the brain to believe in outcomes it cannot yet experience. The healthier body does not exist today. The successful career has not arrived. The peaceful retirement remains invisible. The stronger relationship is still quietly developing beneath the surface. Your future self becomes almost like a fictional character. Someone you know exists, someone you hope will be happy, but someone who somehow feels emotionally separate from the person making today's decisions. Think about the language people often use. I'll deal with it tomorrow. My future self can handle that. I'll start next week. Without realizing it, we speak about our future selves almost the way we speak about another colleague taking over the next shift. Someone else will clean up the mess. Someone else will pay the price. Someone else will carry the consequences. The strange irony is that this someone else has always been you, and yet your brain often fails to experience that truth emotionally. Perhaps this is why genuine long-term change feels so difficult. It is not always a battle between discipline and laziness. Sometimes it is a relationship problem, a relationship between the person you are today and the stranger quietly waiting to become you. In the next chapter, we'll explore one of the most remarkable discoveries in modern psychology. A series of experiments suggesting that the more connected people feel to their future selves, the more wisely they make decisions in the present. And the results may completely change the way you think about your own future. For decades, psychologists assumed that people simply lacked self-control. If someone repeatedly sacrificed tomorrow for today, the explanation seemed obvious. They needed more discipline, more motivation, more willpower. But around the early 2000s, one researcher began asking a completely different question. What if the problem wasn't self-control at all? What if the brain simply failed to recognize its future self as the same person? That question led psychologist Hal Hershfield and his colleagues to one of the most fascinating discoveries in modern behavioral science. Instead of studying money, habits, or procrastination directly, they studied something much more fundamental: identity. Specifically, they wanted to know how connected people felt to the person they would eventually become. The results were surprising. Some participants described their future selves almost like close family members. Others described them almost like strangers, not metaphorically, psychologically. The greater this feeling of distance became, the less likely participants were to save money for retirement, the less likely they were to delay gratification, the more willing they became to sacrifice long-term well-being for immediate comfort. The future self wasn't being ignored because people were irrational. It was being ignored because, emotionally, it didn't fully feel like me. Imagine someone asked you to spend $100 helping yourself tomorrow. Most people hesitate. Now imagine they asked you to spend $100 helping your closest friend. Oddly enough, the emotional calculation may not feel dramatically different. When the future self feels psychologically distant, the brain begins treating it much like another person. The same generosity disappears. The same urgency fades. The same responsibility weakens. Perhaps the most remarkable demonstration came through virtual reality. Participants were shown digitally aged versions of their own faces. Wrinkles, gray hair, older eyes. Not as abstract imagination, but as vivid, realistic future identities standing directly in front of them. Something unexpected happened. After interacting with these older versions of themselves, participants consistently chose to save more money. Not because someone lectured them, not because they suddenly became financially educated, simply because the future self no longer felt invisible. The stranger had acquired a face. Psychologists call this phenomenon future self-continuity. It describes how strongly your present identity feels connected to the person you will become years from now. The stronger that connection becomes, the easier long-term decisions begin to feel. Interestingly, neuroscience offers another clue. When researchers scan the brain while people think about themselves today, a network known as the default mode network becomes highly active. This collection of brain regions plays an important role in autobiographical memory, imagination, identity, and the ongoing story we tell ourselves about who we are. It activates when you remember childhood, when you imagine tomorrow, when you wonder who you've become. In many ways, it helps construct the continuous narrative called me. But here's where things become particularly fascinating. When people think about complete strangers, portions of this same network behave differently. The brain creates distance. The stranger becomes someone outside your identity. Several studies suggest that when people think about their future selves many years ahead, parts of the brain respond in ways surprisingly similar to thinking about another person. Not identical, but remarkably close. This may explain why promises made to the future feel strangely negotiable. Imagine borrowing money from a stranger. Most people would feel uncomfortable. Now imagine borrowing health from your future self. Staying awake another 3 hours, skipping exercise again, ignoring persistent stress. eating whatever feels rewarding tonight. Psychologically, the emotional cost often feels much smaller, because the person paying the bill appears distant. The future absorbs consequences that the present refuses to feel. Every cigarette belongs to someone else's lungs. Every missed workout belongs to someone else's body. Every postponed dream belongs to someone else's life, until one ordinary morning arrives, and suddenly that stranger wakes up as you. One of the strangest aspects of time is that the future always arrives gradually. There is no dramatic moment when you become your future self, no ceremony, no announcement. Yesterday's future quietly becomes today's present, and today's present immediately begins creating another future stranger. This cycle repeats every day of your life, which raises an unsettling possibility. Perhaps your future self has never abandoned you. Perhaps your present self has simply never learned to recognize them. If that is true, then changing your life may require something deeper than better habits. It may require repairing the relationship between the person making today's decisions and the person who will eventually live with every one of them. In the final chapter, we'll explore how psychologists believe this relationship can actually be strengthened, and why a few surprisingly simple exercises may help your brain stop treating your future self like a stranger and start recognizing them as the same person you already are. If your future self feels like a stranger, can that relationship actually change? Modern psychology suggests the answer is yes. And perhaps, surprisingly, it doesn't begin with becoming more disciplined. It begins with becoming more connected. Imagine meeting someone new every single morning. You would never expect deep trust to appear overnight. Trust grows through repeated experiences, small promises kept, ordinary conversations, evidence accumulated over time. The relationship with your future self appears to work remarkably similarly. The brain does not become convinced through motivation. It becomes convinced through familiarity. This is why some psychologists encourage an unusual exercise: writing letters to your future self. At first, it feels strange, perhaps even childish. How can you write to someone who doesn't exist yet? But that assumption may be exactly the problem. Your future self does exist. They simply haven't arrived yet. Every sentence you write begins making them psychologically more real. Some researchers have asked participants to imagine ordinary days decades into the future. Not extraordinary success, not becoming famous, not winning the lottery, just waking up, preparing breakfast, walking through a familiar neighborhood, speaking with loved ones, growing older. The more vividly people imagined these ordinary futures, the stronger their sense of continuity became. Notice what changed. Not the future itself, only the brain's representation of it. This highlights something deeply important. The brain is not only predicting events, it is constantly predicting identity. Who will I become? Who am I becoming right now? Each answer quietly shapes today's decisions. Consider someone learning to play the piano. If they believe, I'm just pretending until I become a musician, practice feels temporary. But if they begin saying, I am becoming someone who practices every day, something subtle changes. The action no longer serves an imaginary future. It becomes evidence of an identity already forming. Behavior starts reinforcing identity. Identity begins reinforcing behavior. Psychologists sometimes call this identity-based change. Rather than asking, what goal do I want to achieve? They ask, what kind of person am I becoming? The difference appears small. Its consequences can become enormous. Running once does not make someone an athlete. Reading one book does not make someone wise. Saving $20 does not create financial freedom. Yet every small action quietly becomes another vote for the person you are gradually becoming. The future self stops feeling fictional. They begin feeling familiar. Neuroscience offers another fascinating explanation. The brain continuously updates itself through experience. This process, known as neuroplasticity, means your neural connections are never completely fixed. Every repeated behavior strengthens certain pathways. Every repeated thought makes future thoughts slightly easier. Every repeated decision teaches the brain what kind of person it should expect you to be tomorrow. Identity is not carved into stone. It is written in habits, then rewritten, again and again. Ironically, this also explains why lasting change often feels surprisingly ordinary. People imagine transformation arriving through one dramatic breakthrough, one motivational speech, one inspiring book, one perfect morning, one life-changing decision. Those moments certainly exist, but the brain trusts repetition more than revelation. One healthy meal rarely changes identity. Hundreds eventually do. One difficult workout rarely changes identity. Years of returning eventually do. One honest conversation with yourself changes very little. A lifetime of keeping promises to yourself changes almost everything. Perhaps this is why your future self never needed perfection. They only needed consistency. Imagine looking back 20 years from now. Would your future self thank you for one extraordinary week of motivation? Or for thousands of ordinary decisions that quietly accumulated into a meaningful life? The remarkable thing about time is that it compounds almost everything. Knowledge compounds, relationships compound, health compounds, confidence compounds, trust compounds. Unfortunately, so do neglect, avoidance, stress, procrastination. Every small decision teaches tomorrow what to expect. Which brings us back to the question we began with. Why does your future self always feel like a stranger? Perhaps because your brain evolved to care most deeply about what exists immediately in front of it. But evolution does not have to become destiny. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, every time you choose long-term meaning over short-term comfort, every time you act in a way that your future self would quietly appreciate, the distance becomes just a little smaller. The stranger begins looking familiar. Eventually, something beautiful happens. You stop making sacrifices for an imaginary person. You begin caring for someone you genuinely recognize. Perhaps your future self was never waiting somewhere ahead. Perhaps they have been growing beside you all along, quietly becoming the person your decisions have been creating every single day. And perhaps the greatest act of self-care is not asking, "What do I want right now?" but asking, "What kind of life am I teaching my future self to wake up inside?" Because one day, that future self will open their eyes. They will inherit every choice you made. And when they do, the greatest gift you can leave them is not perfection. It is the quiet knowledge that, long before they arrived, you were already looking after them.